上次我们讲了 write，那么接下来是 read 啊。我们上次 write 的话有什么 majority 啊，什么 concern 对吧？那么 read 呢，我们接下来讲 read 了，对吧？那么 default 在这里说呢，这个 driver 啊，就是那个 MongoDB 的 driver client 那种 SDK 啊什么的啊，will route all requests to the primary。this is generally what you want， 对吧？那么你去 primary 读，肯定读的是最新的，对不对？关键问题就是 primary 扛不扛得住，对不对？是吧？毕竟只有一个嘛。But you can configure other options by setting read preference in your driver. Read preferences let you specify the types of servers query should be sent to， 对吧？Sending read requests to secondaries is generally a bad idea 啊，就是说，各种考量吧，就是说你 read 发给那个 secondary 的话是他这里是说不太好的啊，但当然我们看看它原因是什么，对吧？但是我觉得就回过头来说吧，你要是要 scale read 的话，你可能如果你 read 量很大的话，你可能还是得从 secondary 读啊，不然的话你全都读 master 也不行啊，罩不住啊，好吧？现在 some specific situation in which makes sense， 对吧？他这里说有的情况下是可以的，比如说你是 eventual consistent 的，对吧？你允许一定的 latency， 对吧？就刚写进去的有可能读不到，你是可以 handle 的，对吧？But you should generally send all traffic to the primary. If you are considering sending reads to the secondary, make sure to weigh the pro and cons， 对吧？好，那么我们看一下 pro and cons。第一点呢，就在讲的 consistency considerations. Applications that require strongly consistent read should not read from secondary 啊，就是如果你对 consistency 要求很高的话，你不 allow eventual consistency 的话，那你还是从 primary 读吧啊，因为 secondary 总归是 secondary should usually be within a few milliseconds of the primary， 对吧？大概是他这里说呢，就 secondary 呢跟 primary 的延时呢大概是 a few milliseconds， 对吧？However, there is no guarantee of this， 对吧？ Sometimes secondaries can fall behind by minutes, hours, or even days due to load, misconfiguration, network error, or other issue， 对吧？你这个就没保证的，对吧？ Client libraries cannot tell how up to date a secondary is, so clients will cheerfully send queries to secondary that are far behind。就是说，你作为 client， 他实际上他不知道这个是 secondary， 他延后多少，所以他就，对吧？就去 query 他也不知道，对吧？Hiding a secondary from client read can be done in a manual process。就有的时候我们前面可能没讲，就是跳过了吧。其实前面有讲啊，也有啊，就是说，你可以 manually 呢，就是把一个 secondary hide 掉，让你读不到啊。像是 if your application needs data that is predictably up to date, it should not read from secondaries. If your application need to read its own write，对吧？你比如说你写完以后你就马上读出来 ，insert a document and send query for it and find it. You should not send the read to secondary unless the write waits for replication to all secondary using W， 对吧？就我们上讲过的，除非你 configure 你这个 write concern， 对吧？Otherwise, an application may perform a successful write, attempt to read the value and not able to find it because it sends the read to secondaries that hasn't replicated yet. Clients can issue requests faster than replication can copy operations 。就是说，他这里最后一句话就是说，那个你的客户端啊发请求啊，可能比那个 replication 它 copy 这个 operation 啊更快，那么你就来不及读到它啊。你刚写完你马上读，上次我说过了，你可能是个connection pool 对吧？这个就另外一个 connection 去，就我是说是MongoDB 的 connection 啊。To always send a read request to the primary, set your read preference to primary 啊，就如果你要你的 read 呢总是 hit 那个 primary 呢，那你就把它 preference 改成那个 or just leave it alone， 所以默认就是 primary， 对吧？If there's no primary, query will error out. This means that your application cannot perform queries if the primary goes down. However, it is certainly an acceptable option if your application can deal with downtime during failovers or network partitions, or if getting stale data is unacceptable， 对吧？那第二个考量呢，就是 load consideration 了啊。我们刚刚说了，对吧？那么就是说 consistency 的，如果你要求的话，那还是读 primary 吧。那我们看一下这个，但是 load 呢，对吧 Many users send reads to secondary to distribute load， 对吧？就是说我们加 secondary 主要是为了 scale load 嘛，因为你可以加好多 secondary， 对吧？For example, if your server can only handle 它能 handle 10000个 query， 对吧？每秒，但是你要 handle30000，你怎么办呢？那你可能就是用 secondary 去，我这里应该说的是 read request 啊，写是没办法，写的话还是得去 primary 啊。However, this is a dangerous way to scale because it's easy to accidentally overload your system, difficult to recover from once you do. For example, suppose you have the situation just described, 30000个 read per second， 对吧？You decide to create a replica set with 4 members. One of those will be configured as non-voting to prevent a tie in election. To handle this, each secondary is well below its maximum load and the system works perfectly until one of the secondary crashes. Now each of the remaining members are handling 100% of their possible load. If you need to rebuild the members that crashed, it may need to copy data from one of the other servers, overwhelming the remaining servers. Overloading a server often makes it perform slower, lowering the set's capacity even further and forcing other members to take on more load, causing them to slow down in a death spiral. Okay, death spiral. Okay, so overloading can also cause the replication to slow down. 对吧？那这肯定对吧？那肯定是 replication 会 slow down, making the remaining secondaries fall behind. Suddenly you have a member down and a member lagging, and everything is too overloaded to have any wiggle room. Okay, if you have a good idea of how much load a server can take, you might feel like you can plan this out better. Use 5 servers instead of 4. 它其实就是这里其实他讲了半天啊，我们先看完吧啊。Use 5 servers instead of 4, and the set won't be overloaded if one goes down， 对吧？他讲了半天，其实就是说，还是说，如果你要 scale load 的话，你还是得用 secondary， 就不能用 primary， 因为 primary 只有一个。那么他说呢 ，secondary 再多加几个，万一一个挂了呢，对吧？这个感觉有点，感觉就是他其实一句话就能讲明白的，我觉得啊，有点赘述了啊。However, even if you plan out perfectly,you still have to fix the situation with other server under more stress. 就是说，你就算有多个那个 secondary to handle read， 还是有可能 server 被，反正总之让你每个 secondary 不要太 100% 的 run 就行了啊。Okay, reasons to read from secondary. 看一下啊。There are a few cases in which it's reasonable to send application reads to secondary， 对吧？比如说，you want the application to still be able to perform reads if the primary goes down， 对吧？那这个是肯定你没 primary 嘛。This is the most common case for distributing reads to secondary. You like a temporary read-only mode when you set loose a primary. This read preference is called primary preferred 啊，就是说我 prefer primary， 但是 primary 没有的话，我可以接受 secondary 啊。One common argument for reading from secondary is to get a low latency reads. You can specify nearest as your read preference. 啊，这里还有就是 geographic 的考虑，就是比如说你有 secondary 的话，你可以就是说离你近一点，对吧？但它可能不一定有那么新，数据不一定有那么新啊。To route the request to the lowest latency member based on average ping time from the driver to replica set member. If your application need to access the same document with low latency in multiple data centers, this is the only way to do it. If, however, your documents are more location-based, 它这里说呢 location-based 就是说 application server in this data center need low latency access to some of your data， 对吧？就这个意思。This should be done with sharding 啊，就是说你尽量用 sharding 来解决了啊，不要通过这种 replica 来解决，对吧？Note that you must use sharding if your application requires low latency read and low latency writes。就我上次也说过，就是说你要 scale write 啊，这里就是他说的 low latency write， 你必须得sharding，因为每个 shard 都有一个 primary， 对吧？那么你增加 shard 的话，那就相对来说这个写的话就可以，你多一个 shard 多一个地方可以写，对吧？啊 ，replica sets only allow writes to one location 啊。Wherever primary is， 对吧？ one primary， 对吧？ You must be willing to sacrifice consistency. You are reading from members， 对吧？这就是我们说的，对吧？你 consistency 肯定是 eventual consistent 了，对吧？ You may not have replicated all the writes yet. Alternatively, you could sacrifice write speed if you want to wait until writes had been replicated to all members 啊。那么另外呢，就是说你可以牺牲写的 speed， 就是说你可以说，比如说我写你，因为你这个写一定要所有的 replica member 都拿到这个写，你才算这个写成功。那么这个写肯定会比较慢，对吧？就是说他要等所有的 member 都拿到，这样的话 read 的话就能 guarantee consistency 啊，这是就相当于是 all 了，对吧？你这个 write consent 就 all 了，对。If your application can truly function acceptably and arbitrarily stale data, 就是说你的 application 能够 handle 就是稍微有点 latency 的 data， 就 stale data， 对吧？ You can use secondary or secondary preferred read preference. Secondary will always read the request to a secondary. If there are no secondary available, it will error out rather than sending reads to primary. 那么你用 secondary preferred 就没有 secondary 就去 primary 了啊，也是有可能。假如说你只有一个 primary 的，对吧？ It can be used for applications that do not care about the stale data, and they want to use the primary for writes only. If you have any concern about the staleness of data, that is not recommended 啊。那么这里说 secondary prefer will send a read request to secondary if one is available， 对吧？ If no secondary available 就 go to 那个 primary 啊。好，那么这里还讲了那个 sometimes read load is drastically different than write load， 对吧？For example, if you are reading entirely different data than you are writing, you might want dozens of indexes for offline processing that you don't want to have on primary. In this case, you might want to set up a secondary with different indexes than primary. 啊，这个就比较 advanced 了啊。就是说，他说就是说你这个 read 和 write 不一样，所以因为这么说吧，你 write 的话。如果比如说你有1000个 index， 你每次写的话就要这1000个 index 都要更新，那其实这个量挺大的。如果假如说你这个 write， 假设啊，你的 write 不需要 handle read， 那这个 write 机器上没必要更新 index， 因为你根本就不会去 read 它，对吧？而唯一要更新的其实是那个 secondary， 因为 secondary 上才有 index， 需要有 index 来 optimize。我再说一遍啊 ，index 使用是 optimize read， 但是对 write 是不好的，对吧？因为你每个 write 都得多一个更新了，对吧？那么因为我们已经分开了 read 和 write 的那个我们如果让 primary 去只做 write and secondary 只做 read 的话，那么他这里说的进一步就是说你可以用不同的 index， 对吧？啊，反正我这个 case 就更加极端了啊，我说的就 write 就只去 primary， 对吧？ If you'd like to use a secondary for this purpose, you probably create a connection directly from a driver instead of using a replica set connection 啊。好吧，这个我不知道能不能细调啊，这个就比较 advanced 了啊，就是对，那你这个就是保证你那个 read 不会 hit primary 了，就是这个就是他能不能做这个事儿，那要看 MongoDB 有没有那么 flexible 了啊。Consider which of the options make sense for your application， 对吧？ You can always combine options. If some read requests must be from the primary, use primary for those. If you are okay with other reads not having the most up-to-date, use primary. 就是你可以用 hybrid 的 solution。就如果你这个请求是要求最新的，那你就从 primary 读，对吧？如果你这个请求不需要最新的，你可以从 read 那个 secondary 读啊。好，那今天就讲到这儿。